Good morning. Welcome to our Bible class today. We are finishing the series on the family, and today we're going to look at how the family and society interacts, which is an interesting concept. Why does God put us in the middle of societies as well? But as we begin, I wanted to ask a couple of questions of you. What was the neighborhood like that you were growing up? Now, I don't know about you, but I know for me it was a very regular neighborhood. It was a neighborhood full of houses, small houses. Around us, there were many families that had kids my age, just younger, just older. In fact, I had a lot of playmates that I had in the neighborhood. We played basketball at one of our friends' house that had a hoop on a pole. We played football in the front yard of a neighbor kid across the street because he had a big backyard without any trees, and so you could play football well with it. We played baseball in my front yard, making whatever we could out of plates. We would go hiking, we'd go bicycling, we'd do all the things that normal people would do. But it was all compact, it was all neighborhood oriented. But the question then becomes, what makes for a good neighborhood? And I think there's some obvious things. Friendliness is one, trust is one. And we also want to know that our neighbors are kind of like us in some way, and that what our neighborhood does is it kind of blends together into an extended family, in which everybody kind of watches everybody's kids at the same time. But in recent years, a lot of things have happened to neighborhoods. Some once vibrant neighborhoods have begun to fall apart. And so what causes a neighborhood to deteriorate? Many of the times it loses that fabric of cohesiveness, that sense that we are together, that we are alike. And as society changes, a lot of times neighborhoods fracture because the people are no longer the same. They're no longer similar in both values and background. Now the next question is, what makes for a society? A society, I suppose, could be defined many ways. I think society can be defined as a collection of people together in one simple form. And it's hard to define society. American society is made up of so many different kinds of people, and that society is what gives coherence and cohesiveness to all the people who are part of it. But it's for that reason we need to find out, how does the church interact, fit, and how do we interplay together? Because if we are the family of God and our families represent that family of God, how in the world do we emphasize our connectivity and our distinctiveness all at the same time? I think it's good to begin with how the Bible paints the progression of societies. It all starts with one single man. In Genesis chapter 2, Adam is created. He is the only human creature. The problem with that, God sees, as we've noticed through these series of lessons, God sees that it was not good for a man to be alone, and so he comes up with a plan. He's going to make a helper that fits him, and so he creates marriage. Marriage then is about Adam and Eve together. Now it's a man and a woman together. But as time would go by, things would progress, and then you'd come to families. Adam and Eve had two children, Cain and Abel, and then a third child, Seth. Now suddenly it's not just one and it's not just two, it's bigger. Then when you continue to read in Scripture, one of the things you come away with is there is what I might call the extended family. And the extended family, you can kind of read this in Genesis chapter 5, verses 3 to 5. It describes what happens after Cain kills Abel and gives us a progression of what's happening in the world today. And as the world is put together. It says, when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image. He named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth was 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus the days of Adam were lived 930 years, and he died. Now that's a small microcosm, but I want you to think about what this means. No longer is it a man and his wife and his only kids. Now their kids have kids, and they marry, and as they marry, they get in-laws, and suddenly you get this extended family. And the extended family begins to grow. But it even moves further than that. When you go to further in the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 2, we meet a man named Abram. And Abram is told by God to leave his country and his family, go to a land God will show him, and he'll give him great promises. One of those is described in Genesis 12 and verse 2. I will make of you a great nation. Now we see a different form. You had a man who marries, they have children, their children have children, it becomes an extended family. The extended family then gets so large that it becomes nation, society. God creates all of those pieces for our good. We are a person that needs other people. We need the socialness of it, the connectivity of it. One of the things we found through the pandemic is when you isolate people, it doesn't do them any good. And the older they get, the worse it gets, because that's their only connection to life. We are social animals. We are social creatures that God created us for. He created us for relationship, both with Him and for each other. And so He creates societies out of families. I think that's an important concept because our families play a role in society in ways we don't think about much. In fact, it was so startling that Paul on Mars Hill, as he preached to the Stoic and Epicurean philosophers, he made mention of the great fact of what was happening. He wanted to give an overview of this God that they didn't know. And so he tells them in Acts 17, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places. God creates society. It doesn't just happen. It wasn't just something that took place. God creates it in a way that out of one man, He makes all nations who scatter to the face of the earth. All of society is made by God. And so God creates societies through people, in families, in clans, in nations. It's important to see that God created this situation, not that it just happened. There's a reason behind it. There's something that is in the mind of God that says man needs societies. But the question is, does society need the church, and does the church need society? Now, if God creates both, we would have to say automatically yes. But there are many people who say no. There are books that I have seen advertised that the premise of those things is that things don't fit. For instance, there are people who in the church believe that society does the church no good. In fact, it only causes them problems. Think about the first and second centuries and what it was like there, the persecution. And yet they couldn't extinguish the church, but the church began to change them. It's strange that as hard as Rome pushed back against the church pushed even harder until finally Rome collapsed and Christianity remained. But today, there are people who do not want freedom of religion, they want freedom from religion. There are whole books that are written by those who do not believe in God, that believe that morality is a human-based quality, that God doesn't enter into an equation. In fact, God will muddle that equation, and they see religion, they see the church, they see Christianity as oppressive and dominating. Now, much of what may be laid at the feet of faith is not from God, but from man. It is a twisted view of Christianity, not pure Christianity. So it's important for people to understand that. That's what is lost on most critics of the church today is they don't realize that a lot of what they're seeing is man-made, not God-made. But John says we can't separate that cleanly. In John chapter 17, Jesus prays before his crucifixion. When John portrays this is a long chapter-length prayer in which he prays for the disciples, he prays for himself. But one of the things he says in verses 14 and 15 is, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. In other words, their character is not the same. I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. Jesus never intended for the church to become hermits, finding themselves in the desert, walled off from all society to keep the big bad culture away. Jesus himself said, don't take them out of the world, but make sure that they're protected from the evil one. That was the point that he was making. So the question is, how does this happen? What benefit does the church derive from society? Now, for most people, it says it doesn't derive anything. It just creates problems. But I think if you look closer, we have needed the cocoon of society as much as society needs us, we think. For instance, when you go to Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, there's this little passage in which this is the only time outside of Matthew and Luke where you even get a hint of the birth of Jesus. Paul says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. He says, in the fullness of time, Jesus came to earth. The fullness of time. What made it the right time for Christ to come? It's an important question. What made that the best time? If you look over the thousands of years that had passed, he could have come any time. Why then? Why at that moment? Why during that period? A lot of things could happen. But one thing that's pretty obvious is the world that he was born in enjoyed what was called the Pax Romana, meaning the peace of Rome. Rome had done a lot of things. Now, they were vile and evil at times, but they had done a lot of things that allowed Christianity to grow. They had a series of roads that could be traveled, well-traveled roads. Paul walks the Appian Way when he gets ready to Rome. It's still there today. Paved roads, comfortable. They could travel easily. They had the peace of Rome. They had the Roman centurion with the soldiers that kept the peace from marauding armies and robbers. It has a period of relative safety. They had a single language. Greek was the universal language at that time, with Latin being the official language of government. And Aramaic could be spoken in places like Palestine. But in terms of what everybody knew Greek. So when you preached, and you preached in Greek, and you wrote in Greek, as our New Testament is written, everybody could understand it. Think about the benefit that what Rome did for the church. Within a generation, the gospel could be disseminated far and wide. Paul could travel all the way from Jerusalem to almost to go to Spain without thinking much about it. There were no passports. There were no restrictions. The word could spread easily. In the fullness of time, there was the right time because God put a society there that created the conditions right for the moment. And the reason is because for the church to exist and do its work, we need order. Timothy gets this instruction from Paul in which there is this interaction between faith and the government, the society at large. Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 2, first of all, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and for all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. Paul recognizes one simple fact, that for Christianity to have lived that peaceful, dignified, godly life, it has to have some form of external order. I want you to think about what order means. The opposite of order is not disorder, it is chaos. When chaos reigns, if you don't have government, if you don't have societies, you have disorder, but you really have chaos. Now, it doesn't take very much of looking in the Bible to find that out either. If you go back to the book of Judges, Judges was an interesting time in that there was no central government. There was no ruling power. There's no one to control things. And it kind of came and went. We think about judges being kings. They weren't kings. They would pop up and disappear, pop up, disappear. But sometimes they didn't. And finally, at the end of the book of Judges, you don't find any judges. What you find is chaos. And when you read the end of the book, the very last verse of the book of Judges, it says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. There was no organized society, would be a better way of putting it. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And if you read the chapters before that, you don't want to live there. There's gang rape. There's murder. There's civil war. There's factions. There's robbery. There's all kinds of things that you cannot live with. And that's what happens when you don't have an organized society. We as God's people need the order and the protection even that society gives us. Even if that society persecutes, at least it holds something together and allows us to do whatever we need to do. It is a benefit that we enjoy. But the next question is, well, does society need the church? That's an interesting question too. Society does need the church. It needs the church for a lot of reasons, even if it doesn't recognize it. See, just because you don't recognize something doesn't mean you don't need it. How many children sit down and think, when they're 3 years old, think, I am so glad I have a mommy and daddy because I really do need them. They don't think that way. They don't recognize it. They just know that it happens. And just because it's unrecognized does not mean it's unnecessary. So you read in the New Testament how we affect society in a positive way. Jesus said it this way in Matthew chapter 5. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under the feet of men. You're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on a stand where it gives light to all in the house. He says that Christians in the church are salt and light. They give flavor to the world in the form of love and care, and they give light in the form of illumination. They tell the world what a better way to live is. It changes society for the better. I want you to think about something that just is about historical. I want you to think about hospitals that are built. Hospitals have tended to be built by churches. In Dallas, we have Methodist Hospital, started by Methodists. We have Presbyterian hospitals, which started by the Presbyterians. You've got Baylor Hospital, started by the Baptists. None of the major medical centers we have around us would be here today if we waited for secular society to do it. It's not a high priority because they don't have the same kind of care. Think about universities. Every major university in this country pretty much had its germination because colleges were started by churches. Educational institutions were not secular at the beginning. They were always started by churches. Many times in small towns, they met in the church house on top of it. Why? Because they cared about the needs of people. If the church is not there, the society crumbles. It becomes animalistic. In short, what we are the braking mechanisms on a world bent to do what it pleases. Now, while critics say you can have morality without God and without religion, I would dare say that morality is going to come down to a simple point. What do I want in my best interest? That's what morality is without God. It's not other-centered, it's personal-centered. What do I do for me? We see it all the time. People stomp all over each other and justify their manipulation and their degradation of others on the basis of this is what I think needs to happen. What if they collide? Who's the referee? There is none. It's just who can beat the other one to the top of the hill. That's called the jungle. That's what happens when animals fight. There's death, destruction, and decay. When Christianity comes into a society, it moderates, it gives it direction, it gives it care, it gives it a sense of morality that it will never have without it. It doesn't take much to see societies without it crumble. But the second thing that's important for the church is the only place that society can find the mind of God. In the book of Ephesians, Paul has a passage in Ephesians chapter 3 that stands out. He says, "To me, though I'm the very least of all the saints, this grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ and to bring light to everyone what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God, who created all things so that through the church the manifold wisdom of God might be made known to the rulers and the authorities in heavenly places." You want to know what God is like? Look at the church. You want to know how God sees the world? Look at the church. You want to know how God wants men and women to react and act with each other? Look at the church. Without the church, society loses its bridge to God's life. Whenever we don't take our responsibility seriously to engage our culture with the gospel of Christ, we make decisions to pull away, to become spiritual hermits to where we never connect with anyone else. We are now depriving them of the one lifeline they have to eternity. You cannot save yourself if you don't try to save the world with it. So we are the ones that are the bridge that God has built from heaven to earth to show His glory. So what do we learn from this lesson? First, God creates the order which provides for the life of the church. We need what society gives us: the stability, the safety, the security. They at least provide the order. It may not be what we want, but at least it provides a framework to where there's a certain amount of physical security because of that. But then God designs and creates the church to provide the order for society. See, society gives us external order. The church gives us internal order. It directs us on how the best way to live, how to care for each other, how to find God, how to find purpose, how to find something that fills that hole in man. As Augustine would say, there is a hole in a man that only God can fill. We are the only ones who can show people how to fill the hole in their life. Whether society recognizes it or not, they need us. And woe be the ones that throw it out. But ultimately it comes down to this. Christ showed both of those. For his death created both the church and saved the world. In the cross, you bring both together. The birth of church, the hope of societies. Without the church, both suffer and will lose. So make sure we don't lose that connection. Thank you for joining me. It was a pleasure being with you again today, and I hope you have a great day. We'll begin a new series next Sunday. Have a great day.